right, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coding with Culp. Today is a great day to learn how to code. In fact, every day is a great day to learn how to code. If this is your first time here, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. Like the video. Today's video is a kickoff video in a series of Python tutorial videos. They're designed to teach the very basics of Python. This video isn't going to make you an expert in Python. It's just a really brief introduction to a few topics. So let's get started by taking a look at the learning goals for today. So by the end of this video, I'm hoping you're going to be able to use Genie to write and execute a Python script. That you're going to understand how to use the print function to output text. You're going to understand the three most basic data types in Python, what are called the integer, the floating point, and the string type. Understand how to import a simple module and use it. Understand how to properly indent Python code. Indentation is super important in Python, as you're going to learn. Understand simple for loops using what's called the range operator. And finally, we're going to understand a little bit about how to get text input from the user. This video isn't going to make you a expert on any of this. It's going to be a brief kind of what I call a 50,000 foot view from above on a lot of these topics. But it's going to get you started and you'll be able to do something in Python when we are done. So let's get to writing some code. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, I'm using a Raspberry Pi, specifically a Raspberry Pi 4. I think they're great for learning how to code. They were designed specifically to run Python and teach people how to code and get people coding. If you're interested in buying one and setting one up, I've got links down below. Or you can buy one from Amazon. I recommend the Raspberry Pi 4 4GB model. It's a great trade-off between speed and price. The 8GB model is great, but it's a little bit of overkill. And I've got a little video on how to set it up and get it running and ready for Python. So first thing I want us to do, if you're running Python, and by the way, what you're going to learn today will work on any platform. Whether you're running Windows, Mac OS, some version of Linux, Python is Python, and so it'll work no matter what your what platform you're on. But if you were running on Raspberry Pi or any version of Linux, you're going to want to know what command invokes Python 3. There's a couple different versions of Python. Two major versions are Python 2 and Python 3. We're going to be learning Python 3 in here. So you need to know how to start up Python, specifically Python 3. So start up a terminal window, and if you didn't see what I did, terminal window right up here. Start up a terminal window, and then just type in Python. And you're going to notice, for me, the Python command starts up Python 2.7.16. So it starts up a version of Python 2. That's not what we want. We want Python 3. Now your Python command, when you enter in Python, may very well start up a version of Python 3, and that's great. But for me, to invoke Python 3, I have to actually type in Python 3, like this. And then it will start up Python 3.7.3. So I need you to remember which command you use to get Python 3. If it's Python or Python 3. If you don't have Python 3 installed and you're on a Ubuntu or Debian-based Linux system like Raspbian, just type in sudo superuserdo apt-get install Python 3. And it'll go out and install Python 3 for you. For me, I've already got it installed. Okay, I'm going to put this to the side. Now we're going to start writing some code. I'm going to fire up Genie. Genie is a integrated development environment. Super easy to use. I like it because it's simple, doesn't get in your way. If you're a new programmer, doesn't do anything super fancy. And sometimes I find that a really fancy, high-end integrated development environment for somebody that's new to coding kind of gets in their way. If you are on a Linux system, a Debian-based Linux system, such as Raspbian, you can type in sudo apt-get install Genie to get Genie. But you're welcome to use any integrated development environment or text editor that you want. So I'm going to fire up Genie, and let's get started. I've already got something there. All right, yours is going to look like this. We're going to go File, New. And we're going to start writing some code. So just follow along as I type in some code. I'm probably going to speed up the video at this point so you don't watch me typing out a bunch of stuff. So I've typed out a few print statements, and in order for us to run this, we're going to have to save it first. Now in Genie, this paper airplane icon right here is the run or execute icon. You can see it says run or view the current file. I believe on Windows and on Mac, this icon isn't a paper airplane, a little airplane. I believe it looks like an icon, but it's the same thing. When I click on it, it's going to tell me I need to save my file. So I've created a folder called coding underneath my Pi directory. If you want to make a folder called coding, I recommend you do. Just press the new folder there, type in a name, and click create. Because I've already got one, I'm just going to double click here. Let me get rid of these real quick. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory or new folder for the program we're going to be writing today. I'm just going to call it hello. Click create. So that creates the folder and brings me into it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to name my file. So up here, I'm going to type in hello world.py. You can actually name anything you want, but it's important that you have the .py on there, the .py. And then I'm just going to click save. Okay, and so it saved it and ran it, and it worked. It says, David, hello, I am Python. David, did you know I was created in 1990 by Guido van Rossum? That makes me 30 years old. So that's great. I think you can figure out what's going on. Print is a function. Notice a couple of things. What I want printed is enclosed in an open and a closed parentheses. And then the text I want printed is enclosed in quotation marks. Now I can actually use either single or double quotation marks. I use double quotation marks there, but I can change them to single quotation marks. It's still going to work just fine. And there we go. Worked exactly the same. I'm going to change it back to double quotation marks. Some people prefer singles. I prefer double quotation marks. So what happens is Python starts executing the program that we wrote, the script, from the very first line, and then starts going down, running each line in turn, one after the other. Now this is great, but we can't do a lot with just print. Let's learn a little bit about variables. Variables are simply boxes, you could think of it that way, that hold information. And we can name those variables. So, for example, maybe the person running this isn't David. So we need to change the name of the person that's running it. We can hold that in a variable. I'm going to call it name. I could have called this variable anything I wanted to. Could have called it name. I could have called it my name. I could have called it your name. I could have named it anything I wanted to. But variable names should be short. They should be descriptive and describe the data that they're holding. So I'm just going to call this one name. Now, a few rules about naming Python variables. As I said, I could have named this anything I want, but a Python variable has to begin with a letter, capital or lowercase, or it can begin with an underscore character like this. The actual variable name itself can contain letters and numbers and underscore characters. So I couldn't put special characters in there. Doesn't work. I could put numbers. I could call this name2 or underscore name2. And I can even put underscore characters in here. All those are valid variable names in Python. Now the underscore character has a couple special uses, but one I'm going to talk about is in naming. In Python, if you have a variable that is composed of multiple words, such as your name, it's traditional to put it all in lowercase and separate the names or the words with an underscore character like that, your name. Some people prefer to do it this way, where the first letter of the first word is lowercase, and then we put an uppercase. Everything else is begins with an uppercase. In reality, it doesn't matter. Pick a style, use it throughout your whole program. I'm going to use this style right here. But anyways, we can now use this. So name equals David. Now in our print statement, we can actually print out that variable. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do that. So what we can do so right here I said hello, print hello, and hello is in quotation marks with the comma and a space. That space is important. You'll see why in a second. And then close quotation marks. Plus, print out whatever's in the name variable. Plus, print out this stuff behind it. And I can do the same thing down here. So I can just say name plus, did you know that was created in 1990? So let's run it. And, oh, I went to full screen mode. There we go. Couldn't find the F11 key. F11 exits full screen. Okay, so the script ran right there. So I did the same thing. Hello, David. I am Python. David, did you know it was created in 1990 by Guido van Rossum? So that worked great. Works fine. And by the way, when you run this, I forgot to tell you something. So remember how I asked you to remember whether it was Python 2 or Python 3 that ran Python? What you need to do is you're going to come over here to build, set build commands, and you just want to make sure that this compile command and the execute command is set to execute Python 3. For me, that's actually Python and the number 3. For you, it may very well just be Python. But set that to the compile and the execute to run whatever runs Python 3 for you. And like I said, may very well just be Python. When Genie detects it's a Python file, it automatically invokes Python. So you don't actually have to type in any of this stuff. You just have to make sure that if you have to use Python 3, that it is typed in this way. Okay, let's talk about what's going on here. So as I said, it's going to print out what's in quotation marks plus whatever's in the value of name. And then say it's going to print out I am Python. Same thing over here. It's going to print out whatever's in the value of the variable name. And then this right here. Did you know I was created in 1990? Now, variables, we can actually change the value of variables. For example, I can say this. I can say now name equals Sue. So can you figure out what it's going to do? Can you figure out what's going to be printed before we run it? Let's go ahead and run it. And by the way, also, when it runs, if it runs your terminal in a background or behind the Genie app, you can just click right up here. And so it printed, hello, David, I am Python. Sue, did you know I was created in 1990 by Guido van Rossum? I'm going to get rid of this. Now we can have variables hold numbers. For example, let's do this. Let's hold the creation year. We said it was created in 1990 and the current year. It's 2020. And we can print that out. So right here, let's do this. Let's say plus, we got to put that space in there. Creation year. Now, something about most integrated development environments. Notice as I type, it's actually kind of trying to predict what I'm typing. I can just press tab and it's going to finish it for me. I highlight whichever option I want and press tab and it finishes it for me. So now let's run this. See what happens. Uh-oh, it didn't work. We got an error. So that's weird because it seemed to work here for name, but not for creation year. Let's read the error and see what it says. Python is really good, one of the better languages when it comes to describing errors. So it's in file hello world.py, so it's in the file that we're working on. It's in line number 7, which line number 7 was the line we just edited. And it says type error can only concatenate string, not int to string. Well, I wonder what that means. So every variable, every piece of data, in fact, in Python has a type associated with it. And what that error was telling us was creation year is type integer. It's a number. And it doesn't know how to add. The plus symbol literally means add. It doesn't know how to add a number and a sentence together. A bunch of text. It doesn't make any sense to it. It doesn't make any sense to us either. If we were to say, hey, what's 5 plus hello? It doesn't make any sense. Let's take a look at variable types real quick so we can learn a little bit about Python variable types. So as I said, every piece of data in Python has a type associated with it. We're going to learn about 3 basic types, and in reality, I don't know, 60, 70, 80% of what you do will be dealing with these basic types, at least in your beginning career as a Python programmer. So there's number types. You can be an integer, or a variable can be a floating point type. Integers are whole numbers. They can be negative or positive. They don't have a decimal place in them. So, for example, 7, 456. Floating point numbers, in simple terms, they're real numbers. They can be negative or positive, and they have a decimal point in them. So, for example, 3.14159 pi, 10.0. And then finally, strings. Strings are literally that, strings of text, alphanumeric characters strung together. For example, hello world is a string of letters and a special character, exclamation point. But this is where it gets confusing, and it confuses a lot of new programmers. Do you notice how this 3.14159 is surrounded in quotation marks? Python interprets that, because it's in quotation marks, as a string of text, not a number. Python does not see that as a number. Python sees it as a string of text. So that becomes important when we start doing math and printing and stuff such as that. So let's go back and see if we can fix the error in our program. Python told us when we tried to run it that we had an error, that it did not know how to convert this or add this number, which is an integer, 1990, to this string right here. So one option we have, option number 1, is we can tell Python with the str function, whatever is in the parentheses, convert it into a string. So that's what str does. It takes whatever is inside of it, inside of the parentheses, and attempts to convert it into a string. Now, because I'm not assigning anything, I'm not saying equals, it doesn't change creation year permanently. Creation year is still going to be a integer variable. But now it should work. And it worked. There we go. And I can prove that creation year is still a number because I can use it in some math. So if the user is running this in a year where it's not 2020, this right here wouldn't make any sense. So we can do some math with our variables. I could say age equals current year minus creation year. And so now I can use this variable age. Age should be equal to 30. In fact, let's print that out just to make sure. So if I want print to print out a variable, I can just enclose it in parentheses like that. So let's run it, see what we got. And sure enough, there was that print age, and it's equal to 30. So now let's use it. Let's use it right here. So you can probably figure out what we have to do. age is once again a integer variable. So we're going to have to say plus, convert it, age into a string temporarily. Now when I run it, works just fine. Now there's another way to do this that we don't have to do any conversion. We can use a comma. Watch this. If I use commas, I'm going to take away these spaces right here. You'll see why in just a second. If we use a comma, Python will then print whatever the value of that variable is. Because we're not using add. We're not saying add these things together or concatenate them. It's going to print out the value of whatever's in the age variable. So let's run it. And it works, but notice something. Notice I don't have a space here, and I don't have a space here. So what's going on is that Python is inserting a space both before and after it prints the variable. Now, if we don't want it to print that space, in Python 3, we can do this. We can say SEP equals, and just use quick 2 quotation marks. I'm using single quotation marks in this case. I could also use 2 double quotation marks. Doesn't matter. What that's saying is it's saying, hey, separate, uses the separator, nothing. And now when I run it, you'll notice we don't have those spaces in there. You can see that right there. I can make the separator anything. For example, I could do // and there we go. It used 2 slashes as the separator. Okay. I'm going to get rid of that because I wanted to put the spaces in there. By the way, there are other functions to do converting for you. For example, let me fire up Python 3 here. Let's do 2 variables. One integer variable, one floating point variable. Did I get that right? 3.14159. Okay. And then one string variable. Okay. Currently, a is a integer variable. Well, let's do this. Let me change C. 3.14159. Okay, notice I enclosed 3.14159 in quotation marks. That means it's going to be of type string. And in fact, I can check that by typing in type and the variable name that I want in there. And it's going to tell me that it's of class string. In other words, it's a string variable. Let's say I wanted to convert it to an integer. I could say C equals, actually I'm going to convert it to float. So what's going to happen is it's going to take whatever's in C and it's going to attempt, if it can, to convert it to a floating point variable or value and then assign it to our variable C. Let's see if that works. Now when I print C, notice it does not have quotation marks around it. And if I check its type, it is now class float. Okay. Now let's do something. Let's learn a little bit about for loops. Oftentimes in programming, we want to repeat things over and over and over again. And a for loop is one way to do that, especially if we want to count the number of times that we're doing it, or we want to do it for a certain number of times. The way we do that in Python is with the for loop command. So I'm going to just say for I in range. Let's say we want to do this 20 times. Let's say we wanted to print out hello world 20 times. Now notice, and this is the important part. When I pressed enter, it automatically indented this line for me. Indentation is super important in Python. What this indentation does is it essentially says everything that's indented after this one level, after this for loop belongs to that for loop. It's really difficult to type while trying to type around a microphone in a way. So essentially what's going to happen is it's going to do this loop 20 times in range 20. However, it's going to start counting at 0. Okay? In fact, let's do this. So let's run it. And there we go. So I can scroll up in my terminal window. It did the first part of our program, and it starts at 0, and it prints this out 20 times. Hello world 20 times. And it prints the value of I. Okay, it prints the value of I. So I, when we're going through this loop, whatever we used here, and I could have done anything. I could have said value. Whoops. Could have said value. Could have called this anything. Okay. Could have called it J. Could have called it anything. It's just a variable. Goes by the same variable naming rules in Python. But I'm going to keep it as I. It's going to get the value, the current iteration through the loop. So the first time we go through the loop, it's going to be equal to 0. And that's why we printed out 0 here, because I is equal to 0. Then it comes back up here, sets I equal to 1, and does it again. Notice we start at 0. We don't start at 1. And because we're doing this 20 times, it goes 0 to 19. 0 to 19 is, in fact, 20 times. It's a common error in Python that we forget that we're not going to hit this value. We're not going to get to 20. It's only going to go to 19. We can do a bunch of other things behind here. In fact, let's import a module. Let's import the time module. So what the import statement does is it imports code that somebody else wrote that has a lot of functions that we can use. Python has a lot of built-in modules. You often hear them called libraries that we can use. And the time module, as you might expect, has a lot of functions dealing with time. The one that we want, specifically a function called sleep. So let's do this. Time.sleep, and the sleep function takes the number of seconds to pause. So we're going to sleep or pause just 3 seconds before we start printing all this out. That way it doesn't go super quick and we miss the first part of the message. So what happened here is we have to put the name of the module that we're importing, which in this case is time, followed by a dot, followed by the function that we want to use from that module. Now be warned, this is just one way to import a module. There's actually quite a few different ways to import modules in Python. We'll take a look at all those later on, not in this video, in a much later video. So anyways, time is the name of the module, dot, sleep is the function. So we should pause for 3 seconds here before we print everything out. And there we go. So pause for a bit and then printed everything out. Now remember when I told you we can actually do more than just one thing after the for loop. Let's do this. Let's say time.sleep 0.1. So it's going to sleep for 1/10 of a second in between each print statement. Also, let's assemble our message. Message equals I. Actually, we're going to have to do it this way. String I plus colon hello world. And inside of the print statement, we can just say print message. So what's going to happen? First time through the loop, I is going to be equal to 0. It's going to say then message is equal to the string value of I. In other words, convert I into a string, concatenate it with hello world. Concatenate is just a fancy term that means to combine 2 strings together. So it's going to concatenate it. Then it's going to print out whatever's in message. And it's going to sleep or pause for 1/10 of a second. Go back up to here. The for loop now, I is going to be equal to 1. So it's going to do these 3 things again, with I being equal to 1, and it's going to do it 20 times. 0 to 19. And there, prints out much slower. A couple quick things about the for loop before we go into getting input, and then we'll be done. The for loop doesn't have to start out counting at 0. We can actually start it counting at any number that we want. For example, let's say we want to start out at 10 and go to 20. The first value is where we start. The second value is where we're going to end, 1 minus that. Okay, so we're going to go 10 to 19. Once again, got to remember that. Something else important about the for loop that a lot of people forget is common error. You got to have a colon at the end of the for loop. So let's do this again. And there we go. We started out at 10, went to 19. We also don't have to go up by ones. If we have 3 values here, so we're going to start out at 10. We're going to go to 20, 19, 20 minus 1, 19. I'm going to go up by 2s. And there we go, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Notice once again we don't get to 20. Final thing I want to show you before we go into quick introduction to getting input. I'm going to do 2 loops. The other loop is going to count backwards. So I just copied and pasted this. By the way, programmers are lazy, but if we can get away with copying and pasting, we will. I can actually go backwards. Let's start out at 20. Actually, we're going to start out at 19. Let's go down to 0. And this is important once again. Common thing people forget. When you're counting backwards, when you're starting out at a higher number than you're ending, you must tell it a step value. You must tell it -1. And just like in going forwards or counting up, you can actually go down by any value you want. So I could do -5 if I want to. I'm going to go -1. Now, here's the question. Are we going to go to 0? Or are we going to get to 1? Or are we going to go to -1? Think about it for a second. And then let's run it and find out. All right. We got to 19. And now we're counting down. And see, we got to 1. How many of you guessed that? So we went 0 to 19. There was the first time through the loop. And then our second loop went 19 down to 1. Notice that I unindented for this for loop. So what's going to happen is everything in this for loop gets executed. And then once we reach the end of this for loop, it drops back down to the next unindented statement and does it again. Okay. Getting input's actually pretty easy. For example, we're never guaranteed that the person running the program is going to be David. So let's get some input, and the function to get input is simply called input. And it takes a prompt. The prompt is actually optional, but let's just type in, what is your name? And now let's run this. So what is your name? I'm going to type in Sue. And there we go. Hello, Sue. I am Python. Sue, did you know I was created in 1990 by Guido van Rossum? That makes me 30 years old. Okay, good. So let's take a look at what's happening here. So what happens is that the input statement gets keyboard input from the user and then assigns it, the equal sign, to whatever variable we have on the left side. This prompt is actually optional. You don't have to have it. Watch this. I will get rid of it. And we'll run it. And you can see it's waiting for input here. And it ran. Press Control Z. Okay, so we can do that for creation year. We can, or actually creation year is going to stay the same. We can do it for current year. We can ask the user, what is the current year? Anybody spot the mistake I've made? Yeah, I forgot to put an open parentheses over here. All right, I forgot to put input right here. That was another mistake I made. All right, so we got input. What's current year? I'm going to run it. It's not going to work. All right, what is your name? David. What is the current year? 2020. And notice we get an error. It's that same weird type error. Type error, unsupported operand for type minus. So it's saying we're trying to subtract a string and an int. So that's weird. That's bizarre because I know we typed in 2020 right there. I mean, right there we typed in a number, not a string variable. But here's the thing. And once again, it's one of those things that people forget from time to time. Input always brings its input in as a type string. Doesn't matter if you type numbers, doesn't matter what you type, it's always type string. So current year is receiving 2020 as a string variable type, not as a number. So Python's trying to treat it as a string variable type. So we can convert it by doing this. Current year equals, we want it to be an int of current year. So let's explain what's going on here. What it's doing is, inside of int, the function int, we place the data or the variable that we want to try and convert to an integer. It does that conversion and then assigns it to whatever's on the left, which happens to just be the variable current year again. And we can do that in Python. Now let's run it and see what happens. All right, what is your name? David. What is current year? 2020. And there, worked perfectly. By the way, to exit a script early, a Python script, just press Control-C, which is what I did there. I didn't want to see it run the whole time. Okay, I think that's all we want to cover. It's a pretty brief introduction to some Python concepts. Not going to make you an expert Python programmer by any means. Let's take a look at our learning goals. Let's just make sure we've covered everything before we end. All right, let's take a look. We said that we were going to be able to use Genie to write and execute a Python script. I think we covered that. Understand how to use the print function to output text. I think we covered that. Understand the three most basic data types in Python, int, float, and string. I think we covered that. Understand how to import a simple module. We did that. Understand how to properly indent Python code. We covered that. I will understand simple for loops using the range operator. I think we did that. And I will understand how to get text input from the user. I think we did that also. So I think we covered all of our learning goals. So once again, if you liked the video, please like, subscribe to the channel. If you got any comments or questions, put them down below in the comment section and I will try to answer them. So thank you so much. Today was a great day to learn how to code and I will see you next time.